Shall we take our reading together, please? If you have a Bible within reach, I'd love to read with you in the book of Ruth, please, in the very last chapter. I don't know whether there's anybody here who hasn't been in for any of the previous meetings, but you've come for the best chapter. Chapter 4 is a peach. And if you want to catch up with the background story to this, well, you can read that pretty easily at home. It's only 3 chapters. It's a 4-chapter book, and it's very beautiful. Let's read Ruth 4 together, please. Now Boaz went up to the gate and sat down there, and behold, the close relative of whom Boaz had spoken came by. So Boaz said, "Come aside, friend, sit down here." So he came aside and sat down. And he took 10 men of the elders of the city and said, "Sit down here." So they sat down. Then he said to the close relative, "Naomi, who has come back from the country of Moab, sold the piece of land which belonged to our brother Elimelech, and I thought to inform you, saying, 'Buy it back,' in the presence of the inhabitants and the elders of my people. If you will redeem it, redeem it. But if you will not redeem it, then tell me, that I may know, for there is no one but you to redeem it, and I am the next after you." And he said, I will redeem it. Then Boaz said, "On the day that you buy the field from the hand of Naomi, you must also buy it from Ruth the Moabitess, the wife of the dead, to perpetuate the name of the dead through his inheritance." And the close relative said, I cannot redeem it for myself, lest I ruin my own inheritance. You redeem my right of redemption for yourself, for I cannot redeem it." Now this was the custom in former times in Israel concerning redeeming and exchanging. To confirm anything, one man took off his sandal and gave it to the other. And this was the confirmation in Israel. Therefore the close relative said to Boaz, "Buy it for yourself." So he took off his sandal. And Boaz said to the elders and all the people, "You are witnesses this day that I have bought all that was Elimelech's and all that was Chilion's and Mahlon's from the hand of Naomi. Moreover, Ruth the Moabitess, the widow of Mahlon, I have acquired as my wife, to perpetuate the name of the dead through his inheritance, that the name of the dead may not be cut off from among his brethren and from his position at the gate. You are witnesses this day." And all the people who were at the gate and the elders said, "We are witnesses. The Lord make the woman who is coming to your house like Rachel and Leah, the two who built the house of Israel. And may you prosper in Ephrathah and be famous in Bethlehem. May your house be like the house of Perez, whom Tamar bore to Judah, because of the offspring which the Lord will give you from this young woman." So Boaz took Ruth, and she became his wife, and when he went into her, the Lord gave her conception, and she bore a son. Then the women said to Naomi, "Blessed be the Lord, who has not left you this day without a close relative. And may his name be famous in Israel. And may he be to you a restorer of life and a nourisher of your old age. For your daughter-in-law, who loves you, who is better to you than 7 sons, has borne him." Then Naomi took the child and laid him on her bosom and became a nurse to him. Also the neighbor women gave him a name, saying, "There is a son born to Naomi," and they called his name Obed. He's the father of Jesse, the father of David. Now, this is the genealogy of Perez. Perez begot Hezron, Hezron begot Ram, Ram begot Amminadab, Amminadab begot Nahshon, Nahshon begot Salmon, Salmon begot Boaz, Boaz begot Obed, Obed begot Jesse, Jesse begot David. So far, our studies in this lovely little book have centered on 3 main people, 3 main characters. There's Naomi and Ruth and Boaz. And now as we come to our final session, it's still going to focus on three people, Naomi, Ruth, and Boaz. Whether we like it or not, our lives tell a story. They did here, and they're still doing that now. Romans 14, Paul's epistle to the Romans, he says, none of us lives to himself. And that's a great truth. One way or another, our lives are going to impact the lives of other people, for good or for bad. Paul Simon wrote a song. He wrote many songs, of course. And in his songwriting genius, he wrote a song called I Am a Rock. At least I think that's what it's called, but it has that line in it anyway, I am a rock, in which he says, I am a rock, and a rock feels no pain, and an island never cries. I think he had in mind a very much older poem written by John Donne hundreds of years ago. And John Donne wrote a poem and wrote a piece about it in which he said, no man is an island. And I know Paul Simon seems to be saying the very opposite, but he's not actually. It's tongue-in-cheek, if you read it carefully. The point of both Paul Simon and John Donne, and on a different level, Paul the Apostle writing to Romans, is that there's an interconnectivity in human life, and we cannot avoid that. The way we live affects the lives of other people. No man is an island. Billy Graham said, we are the Bibles that the world is, speaking to Christians, to believers. He says, we are the Bibles the world is reading. There are many people in the world who won't read this, but they'll read your life. So the connectivity, the way in which our lives speak to other people is important. So let's see again for this last time together what Boaz brings to us from his life. Chapter begins with him, and we'll start there. Then there's Boaz and Ruth, and really we're seeing them together now, and that's the beauty of this chapter. It's a lovely thing. That's where it's all been leading, isn't it? This is the culmination, the climax of the whole story. And then, of course, there's Naomi. And in a sense, this little, in case you hadn't picked it up, by the way, Naomi's a bit of a heroine with me. She's pretty special. And this little book, although it bears the name of Ruth, begins and ends with Naomi. We'll come to that in just a moment. Let's start then with Boaz. The chapter deals with the actions of a righteous and a resolute man. That's a man who gets the job done. We've talked about that already, but I just want to pick up on that again as we draw this to a close, because righteousness is to have its outworking. It's never just a theory that sits with us and we feel that we think right things. The whole business of Christian ethics is what you think is what you do, and if you think right things, you're to do right things. So righteousness is an outworking of righteous thinking. It's the outworking of, in Boaz's life, of what Naomi said in chapter 3. Remember at the end there she said, this man's not going to rest until he's finished the thing this day. And we linked that with the work of Christ, do you remember? There's a wonderful constancy, isn't there, about Boaz? What you see in Boaz in one part is the same as what you see in the other. It's just perhaps more developed, but it's the same essential thing. No contradiction, that's the point. There's nothing contradictory. There's a wonderful constancy about his life. And part of that is his diligence. Now we come to chapter 4 and we find that Boaz's diligence has caused a bit of a problem, at least for us. I'm talking to you, I'm assuming you've got at least an ounce of romanticism about you. Because when you read this chapter 4, I said to you before, try and read this as if you don't know the end. So here's Boaz, and Ruth's come down to the threshing floor. This is where we were on Wednesday, was it? And she's said to him, would you put the corner of your garment over me? I want to come under the wing of your protection. And Boaz said, I'll do that. I'll be the protector for you. But then Boaz says, I can't do it completely righteously because there's someone else that has to have first say in this. There's a closer relative. And our hearts sort of sink a little bit. We kind of think, well, that's okay. You can get around that shortly. But when you come to chapter 4, you kind of want to tap Boaz on the shoulder and say, Boaz, there's no need to be over-righteous about this. You're risking losing Ruth, don't you know? You're going a little bit too far in this doing things right business. And I think if we'd sidled up to Boaz and said something like that, you know what he'd have said? He said, I know. But right is right. Because that's the kind of man that he is. And he wouldn't compromise that. Not for anything. It's a good thing that Boaz's life is speaking to us. Right is right. It's not there for us to meddle with. Shave the corners off it. A long time ago, it's a matter about doing right and putting priorities right and in the right place. I remember reading a story about some contractors from the West working in Saudi Arabia. This was long before they had high-rise blocks in Riyadh. Now they've got their own skyline, but this was way back in the days that Western engineers and contractors worked out there in the desert sands. And they lived in sort of communes or places where they just set aside for the Western workers. And they were there for some time, and some of them decided that it would be a good idea if they could build a bar. They could sell alcoholic drinks, but they knew with Sharia law that wasn't really likely to happen. But they would approach the king and ask him for permission to build a bar. There were other people in the compound who said, we're here for such a long time, we could really do building a church. We didn't think that would go down too well with the king of Saudi either, but they said, well, we can ask. So they approached the king of Saudi Arabia at the time and they said, we'd like permission to build a bar and a church. So he thought for a little while and he said to them, if I were to grant you permission to build one or the other, which would it be? So the delegation thought, this is tricky, because there's a whole lot of people back there. So we'll give us time and we'll come back to you. And the king said, take as long as you like. So they went back and they had the consultation with the people back in the compound, the fellows. And the vote was cast and they said, we'll go for the bar. So they went back to the king and they said, we've decided. It was a tricky one, but we'll take the bar, thank you. He said, well, that's interesting because now you'll have neither. He said, if you'd come back to me and said church, he said, I would have known that people who put their God first in their lives can be trusted with alcohol. But he said, with people who put themselves first, that's a different story. But Boaz didn't put himself first. Right is right, and there's a right way of dealing with things. We're thankful for the message of his life. There's another thing I want to point out about doing right, and that is not cutting corners. We might think we're on the right path, but there's always a bit of a temptation to take the shortcut. And the point about that is that is in essence a reflection of the character of God himself. God never cut any corners. And if you want an example of that, and there's a myriad of examples of it, but I point you to the greatest example. It's what he did in the matter of salvation. When you go home, please read Romans chapter 3, part of which says there is a righteousness that's been revealed to us apart from the law. That is, there's a righteousness by which we knew we couldn't achieve it under the law because we kept breaking God's law. But God's now revealed another kind of righteousness. You think, is God cutting the corners? Has he given us an easier route here to righteousness? But read on. He says this righteousness is it's been witnessed by the law, testified to by the law and the prophets, which look forward to something greater, by the way, not lesser. He says this righteousness is achieved through faith in Jesus Christ. I say, well, that's all right, but is it still a shortcut to getting right with God? He says, no, you get it through his blood. Oh, you mean he had to die for this? Yes. It's way above the law. God himself stepped down to become subject to the law that he gave himself. He's the only one that ever kept it. And then he bore the punishment of those who broke it. And you realize that God's not cutting any corners. This isn't a shortcut. You know why he did that? Paul says in Romans 3, so that he could remain just and still be the justifier of those who have faith in Jesus. And there you have it. There you have a God who will not compromise righteousness. Because if he did, he would cease to be God. And he calls you and I to reflect the same thing, to be Boaz-like, because it reflects his own character. God could only be just if the payment for sin had been properly made, and it was made in the person of his Son. And because it was, he can then give justification to those who believe in Jesus, the God who does things properly. It said that Boaz was also resolute, and we said that Naomi said that in chapter 3, is the working out of that. Diligent, zealous in doing what he set out to do. I like that about Boaz because there's no indolence about him, no sitting back. Rudyard Kipling said that gardens are not made by saying, oh, how lovely, and sitting in the shade. I used to say that to people, and both Andy and I have an interest in landscape gardening, but way back, people would come, we had a little gardening business, and they would say, I want a no maintenance garden. I said, there's no such thing. And people say, well, all right, low maintenance. Well, it depends how you measure low. But gardens need to be maintained. Kipling had it absolutely right. Gardens are not made by saying, oh, how lovely, and sitting in the shade. They require work. And this is Boaz. He not only knew what was right, but was prepared to get out and do something about it. Disciples are not made without some work too. It needs a careful handling of the word of God. And then it needs an assiduous, remember we talked about the assiduity of Ruth. It needs a careful assiduity, diligence in applying that word to our lives. I don't think we need to get into this business of how it was resolved there in the gate of Bethlehem. You picked it out from the text that we read, no doubt, but Boaz rightly said to the nearer relative, you have the right to redeem first before me. And then the man said, yeah, I'll do it. By the way, when you read that, you've got to pretend again. You don't know the end of the story. Did your heart fall off the cliff? You think, no. And you shout, no, this can't happen. Boaz, stop this. And then you breathe this huge sigh of relief when the man says, I can't do it. You do it. You think, oh, it's got back on track. But the way that works, I think, and it's a complex thing that doesn't really relate to any transaction that we know in the Western world today, at least. But the best I can do for you, and I'm sorry about the rather poor illustration, but I guess we're all familiar with the game of Monopoly. Nobody's saying a thing. Well, I'm going to tell you anyway. So you move around the board and you land on a particular place, and then you have, say it's not been bought at that point, and you have the right to buy it, yeah, to purchase that. So you become the purchaser of Leicester Square or whatever it is. I can't remember the rest of them. Old Kent Road, that was the cheap one. And you Mayfair is the other end. So you can buy it if nobody else has bought it. But say the game's been going on for quite a bit, and you land on this thing, and you think you have the right to buy it at that time, and you look at all those little bits of money in your bank, and you think, do I have enough? And maybe you just got enough, but then you've got some other property around the other side of the board, and you were thinking you get around there and to build some houses or hotels on them and really clobber everybody else. And if I buy this, I'm not going to be able to do that. So you say, I'm going to pass. I'm not going to buy this because it'll spoil what I... Look, I'm sorry, but that's the best I can do to explain this. This is the man who says, my inheritance is going to be somehow devalue it. It's going to affect what other plans I had by doing this thing. So, no, it's too much. I could do it, but I don't want to do it because there are other things that are more important to me. And that's where we breathed a great sigh of relief and said, thank goodness, Boaz, you've got her back. I want to say something about talking about both of them now, Boaz and Ruth together. Something about this little word that we mentioned twice now in previous studies, the word kayil, little Hebrew word kayil. We noted it first in chapter 2, and it's used of Boaz. He was a man of great wealth, but it's not really a word that is limited to material wealth. It was the wealth of the man's character, the kayil. And we know that because exactly the same word is used of Ruth in chapter 3, and she had no wealth. So it can't be a thing that just means money in the bank or sheep in the field or whatever. These were two people who had characters of substance. They had a moral quality about them. And I think I said to you on Wednesday, this is a marriage made in heaven. This is just beautiful because a man of kayil and a woman of kayil are brought together. Well, that's very nice. Boaz's strength and his manliness. Ruth with her grace and her beauty, and together the purposes of God are made known in this couple that are brought together. It's a very lovely thing. You know, the temple in Jerusalem that Solomon built, the house of God, Solomon had 2 pillars erected at the front of the entrance to the temple, and he gave them names. And one he called Yakin, and the other he called Boaz, interestingly. And one of them means he shall establish, and the other means in it is strength. It's Boaz. So here these 2 great pillars, and they're standing at the entrance to God's dwelling place. Pillars are symbols of strength, of power, of stability. But these pillars in Solomon's temple were more than that because they were beautiful. A pillar doesn't have to be a beautiful thing, but these were, because round the top of them, we read in Kings, there was carved work, lily work. Yeah, they were beautified. They were adorned. I often think that when I think about Boaz and Ruth in their marriage, it was like 2 pillars, but there was a strength and there was an adorning. The thing was beautiful. And I put it to you in your life, and it doesn't have to be a married life, but if it is, then it applies to that as well. But in our individual lives, we're to be like that. Adorned pillars in relation to the dwelling place of God. That's a whole subject. We need to leave that. So it was with such instruments as Boaz and Ruth brought together that God moved towards the accomplishment of his purposes. That's what we're coming to, isn't it? In this final chapter, the accomplishment of the purposes of God. And it was with such people that we see that unfolding. Of course, God's able to do that with anyone. But don't you love it when it's something that reflects his own character, the beauty of the character of God?
Stand up and bless the Lord, ye people of his choice. Stand up and bless the Lord your God with heart and soul and voice. Though high above all grace, above all blessing, eternal.